Good morning. This morning we are here three people. This is Kathmandu. I'm a teacher trainer of English as a second language. And here is our guest from Botswana, Kathmandu. Here is our guest from Nepal, Aditya. This morning we are going to discuss about teaching English as a second language with a focus on errors and error analysis. So I would like to ask a couple of questions to my colleagues here. Kifili, could you please briefly highlight on the distinction between errors and mistakes?
Thank you. My understanding of the distinction between errors and mistakes is that errors occur when there's a gap in learner's knowledge of the target knowledge. So they are a reflection of the gap in the learner's knowledge. Whereas mistakes are occasional lapses in learning performance of the learner's use. So basically, mistakes could be as a result of me forgetting or the learner forgetting what has been taught, or because they haven't put much effort to really understand the material, or inappropriate application or use of the content that they have learned. So the errors essentially are deviation from the expected content that the learner should produce, and it results because the learner does not know. So the learner, it's like not taught and hence ignorant of what is expected of us. So essentially, for me, that's the difference.
Okay, thanks a lot. Wonderful ideas. Mr. Aditya, can you please briefly highlight on the sources of errors? Where do errors come from? What are the sources?
So I think thank you very much, Mr. Nathasar. So in my opinion, I think the sources of error originate from interlingual and intralingual errors. Interlingual meaning inter is within, so that these types of errors come in for the learners because of their mother tongue language and what language they've been learning originally. If, for example, a French person were to say she sees them, the word phrase she sees them in English into French, a direct translation would obviously be elle regardait le, but in French that's incorrect because the le comes in between elle and regarder. So these originally come from their L1 mother tongue language, which shows in the learning process of the target language. The second one would be intralingual. Intralingual is specifically to do with misuse of a particular rule of the target language. So it's basically the opposite of interlingual errors. It puts the target language into focus. And it's basically to do with two types of how do we say, errors in the intralingual error category. One is overgeneralization. So when the speaker applies grammatical rules in cases where it doesn't apply. So for the word tooth, they can say tooths and add the S and make it plural. Or when you're trying to fix the word he goes, instead of saying he went, they put it into past tense and they say he go and add the word ed.
Okay, thank you. So like the target language, what they have learned already has the effect in the input they are going to learn.
Yeah.
Right? So this is intralingual. Okay, Kifil, could you please mention a little bit like the types of errors? For example, let's say developmental error. What does it mean, developmental error?
So development error is somehow part of the overgeneralization this later is subtitled International and Developmental Learning. So the D indicates that the learner has started developing their linguistic knowledge and failed to reproduce the rules they have lately been exposed to in target language learning. So the learner, it's like, is trying to find shortcuts into understanding the language. So they come up with their own rules of understanding. And then we also have induced errors, which are caused by misleading teaching examples. That the teacher may take it for granted that using certain words will guide the student, and yet the student might interpret them in a certain way. So that originates from the teachers. And then we have also errors of avoidance. These learners fail to apply certain target language rules just because they are thought to be too difficult. So this avoidance is that the learner's approach is that it's difficult, hence it avoids to master that. So errors of overproduction. In the early stages of language learning, learners are supposed to have not yet acquired, accumulated, or satisfied linguistic knowledge, which can enable the use to use the finite rules of the target language in order to produce infinite structures. And most of the time, beginners overproduce in such a way they frequently repeat a particular structure.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. As a teacher, we have special roles to help the students develop their English language proficiency. And errors are inevitable, right? Errors are signs of learning. Some level of learning is taking place. So we should not be worried about errors. However, we have the responsibility to help the students correct the errors. As a teacher, Aditya, how can we help the students to improve or reduce, let's say, reduce their level of errors?
So obviously, in my opinion, errors have been researched for a long time, and there's no one right way to explain how to fix this specific error or that specific error. But I would say observing, body language, facial expression, they're having an idea about their grammatical structure. So, for example, in interlingual, when they mix this idea about their mother tongue language and use the structure of their mother tongue language into their target language, it can be important for the teachers to analyze this and see how their mother tongue is structured and what type of error they're making while directly word for word or grammatically translating from one language to the other.
Okay, thank you, Kefil. How do you help the students to reduce the errors in learning a second language?
So you help the students by encouraging self-correction. You provide cues, maybe in terms of word or pictures. You also indicate that there is an error, but wait to allow the student to correct it. So you help the students to themselves take the lead in identifying the errors that they made. So that self-reflection helps the students to pick those errors and correct themselves. And also peer correction, that is eliciting responses from the class to the board. You encourage the student to brainstorm the responses in groups, encourage them to identify those errors and correct them collectively. So also the teacher correction can be asking or clarifying questions. It could be asking the student to repeat the answers, rephrasing the questions, because sometimes errors come as a result of the teachers not having been clear in the first place, or maybe the instructions were not quite clear, and then that resulted in an error. So rephrasing the question and also trying to make the instructions a bit clearer, the teacher can help the students to correct those errors. Reference, resources, corrections, you encourage the students to look into things like dictionary or look into grammar books. You help students to correct errors in that sense. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aditya and Kefil. This morning we discussed quite a bit about errors and mistakes. We tried to make a distinction. Then after, we also discussed about the sources of errors, lingual and intralingual errors, types of errors, and finally, how can we as a teacher of English support our students to reduce the errors. Thanks a lot for your wonderful participation.
Thank you.
Thank you.